Hello and welcome back to my studio. It's Lois here from Lois and Morgana Davidson Art, and today I'm going to share an exploration session with you in my studio where I play around with paint trying to create a wild and beautiful abstract landscape. I'm going to be using a very different and direct way to apply the paint to start with. A spontaneous painting, just allowing the wet in wet paint to sort of more or less do what it likes and to just minimally direct the paint and just exploit whatever happens on the page. These kind of intuitive abstract landscapes can be a great way of discovering new ideas and new ways of painting. But first, don't forget to check out my new book, Landscapes in Watercolour, Techniques and Tutorials for the Complete Beginner, which is now available to purchase online from all good bookstores in the UK and to pre-order from elsewhere. As with most experiments or warm-ups, I use the back of an old painting, so it's a great way of saving money. I've taped it to my board with ordinary decorator's masking tape, with my table easel set to about 20 to 30 degrees. I'm wetting the sky all over, and I shall wet some areas of the land and leave some dry. And I'm going to start off by scraping tube consistency paint from left to right, indigo, burnt umber, Payne's grey and burnt sienna, scraping the paint across the paper using a plastic store card. This flexible plastic card is a great way of delivering rich paint to the paper in a fairly random way. Obviously you control where it goes, but it's difficult to know how the colours are going to blend on the page. It depends where you've got wet paper, you'll get softer edges, and where you have dry paper, you'll get harder edges. You can then use the flat of the card to scrape the paint across, or the edge of the card to create little lines and things. And then you can go in with a brush and adjust the paint and just play around. So I'm looking for a sort of cliff top or some sort of abstract landscape feature like that. Now I've just picked up a little bit of indigo from my card, and I'm using a wash brush just to wash it across the sky, give myself a nicely diffused sky. Even though this is going to be an abstract landscape, I want to keep the features in the sort of classic places: sky above, land below, etc., etc. But I'm just allowing the paint to marry and mingle on the page, brushing across some foreground, again lifting paint from the little card and using that. And then I'm just playing with the effects. I'm softening if I see I need to soften with a damp brush, moving the paint around if I need to, and then I can pick my board up and tip it and tilt it. Turning it around 90 degrees like this means that the paint, any water and paint that's wet enough, will flow down the page. And this has the effect of flattening out my sky wash. And of course you can turn it any way you want, upside down, around a little bit the other way. It just depends where you want the water to flow. So remember, you're directing it, you're having fun, you're seeing what happens if you try this, seeing what happens if you try that. I'm using a flat brush and pulling some of the richer paint through other areas of the paint, really just playing. This can be so much fun. It can teach you so much about watercolour paint. Of course, every single painting made in this kind of way is going to be different. That's the point. This is all about exploring a unique way of painting, in that you're the one that will be making the decisions about your painting. You will be the one that decides which direction to turn your painting, whether to tilt it, where to apply the paint more thickly, where to just create soft washes. So it's a really interesting way of painting. Sometimes when you apply the paint, you could end up with really thick patches of paint from the card scrape. So go on with a palette knife, or you could use a piece of tissue and just remove any very thick areas of paint. You can also, of course, use the palette knife to scrape extra texture into your abstract landscape features. There's no rules when you paint in an experimental way like this. even if you prefer a more sort of straightforward classic watercolour painting technique. It's really good fun to try an exercise like this every now and again. It can be quite an eye-opener and can possibly add a few different ideas and techniques and effects to your sort of arsenal of watercolour techniques. Just using a tissue or an absorbent paper towel just to lift out a little bit of water where it was just looking a little bit too wet over on the left. And now this is ordinary fine table salt. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of this into the damp paint. If this gets sprinkled into paint that's too wet or too dry, then the effects won't work. But if it's just damp, then each salt grain will push aside the paint and create some little blossoms or bloom effects. And that could suggest flowers, frost, snow, brambles, anything really. Remember, we're painting abstractly, so everything that's painted here is open to any interpretation that the viewer might want to make. And while I wait to see what lovely effects the salt will give me, I'm going to do one last thing just before everything dries. I'm going to use a piece of soft mask, in other words, a piece of paper laid carefully over the upper part of my painting to protect the sky. And I've got an inky consistency mix of burnt sienna, and I'm using a fan brush and lightly tapping it to put some spatter of burnt sienna in amongst the salt, and hopefully that should give me some really pretty effects and echo some of the orange that's showing through on my cliff face. And now I need to step away, leave it to dry completely, so I'm going to go and have a cup of coffee. So here's the dry painting, and I'm really pleased with the salt effects. This painting is open to many different interpretations. It could be a cliff top and a tumble of wild flowers across the bottom. That's what I'm seeing anyway. But I'm using a clean dry brush to just brush off any remaining grains of salt that might not have fully dissolved into the paint. And now all I'm going to do is remove the tape and have a look at it. I don't think I need to do anything more to it. I could add some people in the foreground, I could add some birds in the sky, I could add some trees, I could add anything if I choose to, but I'm choosing not to. I'm choosing to leave this simple, suggestive and evocative scene just as it is. I'm really enjoying the contrast between the light and the dark, the hard edges and the soft edges, the soft transitions, the pretty little blooms and blossoms and textures in the foreground, and of course the striking textures in the cliff face across the background. There's so much to explore and enjoy if you paint abstractly like this. Looking a little bit closer, you can see some of the subtle effects that were caused by applying the paint with a flexible piece of plastic in the way that we did. And of course, the classic watercolour washes in the sky with the graduated wash that I painted in the sky. And then these beautiful washes across the foreground, which have had a completely different kind of texture brought out of them from these tiny little salt grains, creating these effects in the paint. And of course, the beauty of painting like this in a sort of an abstract way is the sense of freedom that you feel. There's no wrong or right approach. And of course, it isn't always going to work out. Sometimes things will go wrong and you end up with a big muddy mess. But other times you end up with something that you're really happy with, that has a beautiful abstract feel to it, that's really interesting and visually engaging, and something that's just sort of appeared as if by magic as you play around with the paint, taking the pressure off yourself so that you remove that sense of having to try to produce a finished piece of work. This is all about exploring, having fun and playing with the paint. Well, that's it from me today. If you enjoyed the video, then please give us a thumbs up, and please also consider subscribing to our channel if you're not already subscribed, as it's free to do and it really helps us with our reach on YouTube. And thank you so much to everybody that supports the channel on Patreon. We really do appreciate you. I'll see you again soon. Take care and happy painting. Bye.